All right, welcome back to another edition of the Forza Athletics Life and Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Charles Inferna. We're at Forza Athletics, we equip coaches and athletes with the tools they seek out in order to achieve their unique and specific goals. And we're recording here, let's see, what's today's date? Oh, didn't even catch it there. Thursday, September 22nd. Whew, September's already over. First month of the school year. Pretty much over for the most part, and with the first month being over of school, elementary and high school that is, we are on the early onset of training for our indoor and outdoor seasons 2022-23. 2022-23. So we had our team meeting on Monday. Fantastic turnout. I think the biggest turnout. We still had athletes that weren't able to attend for classes and what have you. But the largest turnout of athletes that we've had thus far at Alfred State. A nice healthy group of male and female throwers, like maybe 30, 35 of each gender as we start to move forward. And as part of my section of the meeting, we talked a little bit about early onset goals and how to structure our day to maximize our time, maximize our efforts, and really just try and take advantage of the opportunities we have throughout the course of the day. So I shared a document with all of our athletes. I've talked about it here before. I've written a couple posts about it, but I think it's worth repeating. Is that we have about 33 weeks to our outdoor conference championships. It sounds like a long time, right? 33 weeks. It's basically Mother's Day weekend is usually when we have our outdoor conference. It's the whole academic year for the most part. But we don't have an indoor conference championship. So besides regionals, there really isn't too much, to really look forward to as a larger team, as a larger group. So a lot of the emphasis we place is on the outdoor season, where we've had some relative success the past couple of years. So we're 33 weeks out from that. And in talking and sharing ideas with the athletes, I asked them to jot down some ideas for themselves, some thoughts that they have about, really what they want to accomplish this year, and how they can structure a plan, or begin to structure a plan that's going to help them do that, accomplish those goals. So really, the first thing that we talked about was what's the big aspiration or two, depending on what events they compete in, and how many events they're going to compete in, and what the first, second, or third events are. Anyway, and I asked them to write down why it's important for them to achieve that specific goal. And I shared some ideas and some thoughts about not so much previous athletes that we've coached as a group, but just particular situations and concepts around accountability and expectations for yourself. So really, we talked a lot about, you go to college, and the expectation is, depending on the college, that you graduate in 2 or 4 years. All right, so 4 or 8 semesters. And that there's milestones, there's check marks along the way that you accomplish as you move forward. And we structured our talk and our discussion similar to setting up, an academic program, right? So we know what the end goal is, or they think they know what their end goal is, right, for the most part. And then we built some checkpoints along the way. So how do we know that we are accomplishing this goal? And it's not necessarily about running faster, or throwing farther, or jumping farther, or higher, or what have you. But how do we know that we're on the right track without necessarily setting a PR every single week? Because that's not very realistic. And we know that as coaches, that you're not going to hit a personal best every week, right? So you might throw like within 95%, let's say, which is huge, but you might not hit a PR over the course of an entire season, right? So the checkpoints are process goals. What do we want to do every week that's in our direct control that's going to help us achieve our goal, right? So what are those little things that we can do every day that are really non-negotiables for ourselves? And for a lot of our athletes, when we talked about sleep and rest and recovery, they kind of chuckled, which, I guess it might be difficult to get 8 hours of sleep a night, or they think it's difficult to get 8 hours of sleep a night. So we talked about prioritizing our time and just trying to figure out, when we could sneak this in, right? So obviously we have to do our homework. That's the number one most important thing, because if we don't remain academically eligible, we're not going to be able to compete. So when do we have time in our day to do other things that will help us academically, right? That's not going to impede on our practice schedule and practice times and hanging out with our teammates and like those social things. And then trying to focus in on, right, the non-negotiables for performance, right, sport performance. So we have the social aspects. We want to try and have some track and field aspects also. But what are like other things? So they were writing all these notes down, and I thought it was great. Now, mind you, I've probably spoken longer here than I did with our kids, because I wanted to try and keep it as short and sweet as possible, to kind of get the best impact, for the group, especially since we have a slew of new freshmen. And then some of the things to think about are, sacrifices, where sacrifices might not necessarily be lumped in with those process goals, those non-negotiables. But for some athletes, they might be, right? So sacrifice of, I don't even know, because I don't consider it a sacrifice. I consider it more that we can't afford not to do something. We can't afford to take care of like nagging injuries. We can't afford to not go to the weight room. We can't afford to skip training sessions. We can't afford to do that. So the decisions, I don't know, to me it's kind of like a no-brainer, right? But really what it gets down to, and what I explained and shared with our athletes, is that it's really an accountability exercise, right? As us coaches, we prepare programs, we prepare an outline, we prepare a path for our athletes to travel along on this journey, but we really can't make them do anything else. So for those that wrote it down on paper, those that put it in their phones, those that did both, I applauded them, because that's ultimately is what's going to keep them on track when we're not in practice with them for those like 10 to 12 hours every week. So if coaches are done, like say 6:30, training sessions are done, maybe it's time to do some homework and whatever else athletes do. We're really at the mercy of their decision-making skills and their ability to make hopefully healthy, informed decisions when it comes to that stuff. That's one, right? Two is how much of that work are they actually going to put in, right? So one athlete wanted to run a lot faster, another one wanted to throw farther, but they were kind of lackadaisical last year. So how much of that are they actually going to redirect their time and energy to what they said that they're actually going to do. And it's not necessarily just for track. I mean, this is life stuff too, right? Like, when I started working on my doctorate program, right, there were a lot of sacrifices, a lot of time spent away from loved ones, with the understanding that you're going to achieve this great goal and this this milestone in your life that will hopefully allow for more time, with family after the fact. And then really what types of new skills, like what are they going to need to be able to do? So for running, if it's not necessarily mechanics, is it more information on like strength and conditioning, weight room stuff? Is it more about nutrition, rest, recovery? So the skills that we need to develop and focus on really aren't always what we might assume them to be. So just some things to think about, right, when we're thinking about goals and trying to set down aspirations for ourselves, and we're trying to figure out what we want to do. It really is interesting to just think about why achieving some of those goals are important to us, what we're going to need to do in order to achieve those goals, what we can't afford not to do in order to achieve those goals, and how accountable are we going to keep ourselves as we move forward. So when you look at it, like 33 weeks out from conference, 35 weeks out from outdoor nationals, it's a long time. It's a long time to try and stay motivated and inspired, and that's where having a good foundation of process goals and being able to check off certain things every day that should help us get closer to achieving that. Even break it down even smaller, 35 weeks. Let's say we have 4 training sessions a week, right? That includes or 4 training days a week, let's say, right? So that's 20, so it's like 140. So we're looking at like 140 to 160 training sessions between at least throwing and weight room, right? So if we hit all those training sessions, that's good. If we get 6 to 7, 8, closer to 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, that's even better. If we take care of our recovery, like as far as athletic trainers and things like that, that's another check. So that moves us closer, hopefully. And as we start checking all these boxes, we make all these deposits of training sessions, so that when the time is right, we want to withdraw those training sessions and hopefully have a peak performance in competition. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Forza Athletics Life and Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Charles Inferno, and have a great day.